I saw Blade Runner 2049 last night with a friend of mine, and I thought it was a really good movie. So I was disappointed this morning when I saw a news article saying that it was going to disappoint at the US box office and underperform. I forget which website it was, I'll put it behind me when I'm editing this video, said that it was only supposed to make projected like 36 or 37 million this opening weekend in the US, which is not good for a movie that costs $150 million to make. The budget is $150 million. And I think it was supposed to make about like 50 million opening weekend. That's what they were hoping that it would make. But now that's only supposed to make, 36. And although I've seen it and I think it's a good movie, having seen it, I think I can see why it may not do as well. Because I don't think it's a blockbuster kind of movie. It's a good movie, but I don't think it's the kind of movie that's for like mainstream general audiences. And I'll explain when I go into my review right now. Just to give you a quick plot summary, Blade Runner 2049 takes place like in 2049, future like Los Angeles or Southern California. And Ryan Gosling, the star of the movie, plays a cop or a Blade Runner who hunts down replicants who are like these androids or artificial humans that were created to be workers off planet. And there's a newer model of replicants, and those are supposed to be the good ones that are accepted as workers by society right now. But the older replicants are the ones that he's supposed to be hunting down. And, he either takes them in so they can be retired, decommissioned, essentially killed or taken off the market. Or if they refuse to comply, he's got to execute them in the field. Just whatever it takes. And this is a follow-up to the 1982 sci-fi classic, The First Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott. And that starred Harrison Ford as a Blade Runner back then who was hunting down replicants too, because replicants were supposed to be unstable and I forget exactly, I saw that movie, but the replicants back then were supposed to be unstable and things like that, and they had to be taken out, some of the ones here. And in this movie, what's different is it takes place in the future, because I don't remember what year the first Blade Runner took place in, but this one takes place in the future, and there was some kind of like catastrophe on Earth that blacked everything out, and there was a new guy who came in. The original replicants were made by the Tyrell Corporation, but after this catastrophe, this disaster, this new guy came in, Neander Wallace, and he made a new kind of replicant in synthetic farming. And with synthetic farming, they were able to, make the Earth livable for people again, and he had new replicants that replaced the old ones. And there's like a new order and a new way of the world nowadays, and things have changed. Neander Wallace is played by Jared Leto, and he is, manufacturing this new wave of synthetics, this new wave of replicants. And I think he's like the most powerful person in the world right now. And Ryan Gosling, he's a cop. He works for the LAPD, and his boss, I forget her name, but she's played by Robin Wright. She's his superior. And he has this girlfriend who's an artificial intelligence. She's not real. And she's played by Ana de Armas. And those are the main characters. Oh, and Jared Leto's Wallace, he's a businessman. His right-hand woman is a replicant, and her name is Love, L-U-V. She's a replicant too. And those are pretty much the main cast members of the movie. And that's where my summary ends, and I'm going to go into spoilers. Well, first I'm going to talk about the movie itself. The movie is very cerebral sci-fi. It has action in it, but it's slowly paced, and it focuses a lot on character development and atmospherics. The cinematography is excellent by Roger Deakins, I think. This movie is directed by Denis Villeneuve. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. And his cinematographer is Roger Deakins. And they do a great job. They recreate the kind of film noir sci-fi look of the 1982 Blade Runner, which was directed by Ridley Scott. And it has a lot of this artistry to it. It's a very bleak and depressing world, but it's beautifully bleak and depressing. Like, there's a lot of artistry. And you kind of wonder if in a society where people take so much time to build buildings and sculptures that are so artfully done, is this a society, without hope or that's bleak? Obviously there's a love of art and beauty. So, it's so, the presentation is so well done in the movie. It almost makes it seem like if this was a really destitute place, it wouldn't be that depressing, right? That there's some kind of culture behind it that has a sense of upward mobility, or just, more going for it than this destitute, like almost barren landscape with the dregs of society, or people who are stuck in this barren wasteland. For a barren wasteland, it looks actually kind of nice. It just looks like something that somebody needs to clean up and, repurpose. I guess you could say it's similar to how people say like Detroit is these days. It was a great city, but because something happened and economic stuff happened, Detroit like isn't that great anymore. So I guess you could say that's the way the world is now right now. It was cool at once, but because of the catastrophe, the global catastrophe, things have left in disarray. I guess that's how you can kind of rationalize it as a viewer. Now, you would think, like, since the movie looks good, the cinematography is good, and has good character development, why isn't it a mainstream movie? Why is it not going to make a lot of money? Well, because it's really long, and it's so cerebral and so, like, focused on characters that it's not necessarily, it doesn't have the elements of, like, a blockbuster movie. It's, it's not fast-paced. It has action in it, but the action is spread out, and it's kind of subdued. And, it wasn't made for the visceral kind of kinetic spectacle like of a Fast and the Furious movie or a Marvel movie or, like a DC movie even. And I think that's kind of the problem. Denis Villeneuve, he made movies like The Arrival. That was very highbrow, slow-paced sci-fi too, but it wasn't, and I think it made good money, but it was relatively inexpensive. So this movie cost $150 million, so it has to make a lot more money than The Arrival did and has to reach a larger audience. Now we're going to go into spoiler territory, and I'm going to talk about the plot and explain why the plot, while good, at the end of it, there's like an end reveal that also makes it somewhat disappointing. And in some ways, it's a masterstroke in that you don't necessarily see it coming, but at the same time, narratively and emotionally, it kind of deflates the whole story. And I'll explain. In the previews and the trailers, you can obviously tell that Ryan Gosling's the main character and that he's a hunter or a cop. But they're ambiguous as to whether he's a replicant or a human, an android himself or a human. But in the movie, he's a replicant. And they don't waste any time telling you that. Like in the first scene, it's, revealed that he's a replicant. He's a replicant Blade Runner who's hunting down older models of replicants. So he's kind of hunting down his own kind. But he's got to follow orders. He was programmed to do what he was told. But he also has a soul, and, he doesn't seem to care or whatever about hunting down the older replicants. He just has to do what he has to do. But as the story progresses, he finds clues that lead him and the story to believe, and the story leads you as the viewer to believe that he's not a normal replicant. That he is actually, like, because replicants are recreated in a lab and, birthed as adults. But he believes that he was a child who was born from two replicants, or replicant and a human from the first movie, which is Harrison Ford's character, Deckard, and Sean Young's character, Rachel, who was a replicant from the first Blade Runner. In the first Blade Runner, they make it unclear whether Harrison Ford is a replicant himself, but it's obvious that Sean Young's character, Rachel, is, and they got together and had a baby in this movie years ago, and that turns out to be Ryan Gosling's character. So you think. But by the end of the movie, it's revealed that, no, it's a fake out. Ryan Gosling and the audience were led to believe that he was the baby, but it's actually somebody else. And Harrison Ford's character as the father messed with some records to throw people off the tracks. And Ryan Gosling had found fake records that led him to believe that he was the baby, but it was actually somebody else. So he was duped, just as a lot of other people were duped, and the audience. And that's actually a cool fake out, because I don't think a lot of people saw that coming in the movie, and it's a credit to the screenwriters. But once you find that out, you're kind of deflated because you like Ryan Gosling and his character, and you're behind him, and you're just like, yeah, I want this guy to be the chosen, one, or the chosen savior of all the replicants, and to prove that they're not just, these soulless automatons that they can reproduce and be like their kind of own thing. And it kind of just messes everything up emotionally. That's me. I mean, it is still a very good movie, but I think that kind of is also kind of a letdown. And I think that might harm the movie going forward. I mean, I get it's smart. And if this was a literary novel, and basically highbrow cinema basically is like cinematic literary novels, it does work. It's great. But, it doesn't exactly, it's not that emotionally satisfying. And I think that it might cripple the movie going forward. We'll see, though. We'll see what kind of legs Blade Runner 2049 has. I mean, a movie doesn't necessarily have to open big. It just has to be consistent and make money over time. And we'll see how it does overseas. Although I don't think this movie has much overseas appeal either, because usually the movies that do well overseas, they either have a big spectacle, you know, booms and explosions. This one has explosions, but they're spread out. It's definitely not, you know, like a disposable sci-fi action flick. That's what I'll say. So, you know, we'll see. I think Blade Runner 2049 is good. I think it's maybe an indie or an art house sci-fi action movie masquerading as a big blockbuster film, which is why it may disappoint. But I do highly recommend it if you're a fan of sci-fi, and if you have an open mind and you're willing to see something that's not, I guess, of the instant gratification kind of vein of sci-fi or superhero blockbuster movies that we get these days. Something that, you know, is a bit more cerebral, that thinks about existence and things like that. Just like the first one did, this is for you. And this is actually, in some ways, maybe this is for the best, because just like the first 1982 Blade Runner, which was a box office flop when it came out, it became much more celebrated and revered over time. This one can be the same way. Critics love this movie already, but audiences are kind of like not really seeing it that much. And it is unfortunate because the movie has an open-ended ending where they're setting up like a replicant uprising where the replicants are fighting for their independence. And Ryan Gosling's character, he's mortally wounded. And at the end of the movie, he's laying on the steps and these steps in the snow, bleeding out. And it's ambiguous. It looks like he's dying, but the movie cuts before he actually dies. So I think if they make a sequel, they'll say, oh, you know what? He didn't die. He lived, and he's going to be the main hero of Blade Runner 3. But because if this movie doesn't make that much money, there might not be a Blade Runner 3. This might just be it. And it could end here, because the story is, even though there's going to be like a replicant rebellion, but even so, just you knowing that's going to happen might be enough for you to be like, okay, I know what's going to happen in the next movie or in the future of this cinematic universe. So if I don't come back to it, I'll know how it plays out. So I know the filmmakers are hoping that they'll be able to make a Blade Runner 3 so they can continue this story. But in Hollywood, you don't get a sequel if you don't make that much money. So we'll see. We'll see what the story of Blade Runner is, if we get a Blade Runner, threequel, or if this is the final entry in the series. But I do recommend it, and you should support it. And if you want to watch me make more videos about movies and TV shows and comics and all that good stuff, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.